The plate slid across the polished mahogany table, and Ethan Caldwell's world tilted. A folded scrap of paper, barely noticeable, peeked out from beneath the sizzling ribeye. "Help me. I'm trapped." See. Ethan, 28, CEO of a rising tech startup in Manhattan, froze. His sharp hazel eyes darted around the upscale restaurant, the Gilded Fork, where crystal chandeliers cast golden light over power brokers and socialites. No one else noticed the note. Not his assistant Mia, scrolling through her phone across the table, nor the waiter who just delivered his meal with a practiced smile. His pulse quickened. Was this a prank? A mistake? Or something far darker? He tucked the note into his palm, his tailored suit sleeve brushing the tablecloth. Ethan was used to high-stakes decisions. Leading a company through a competitive tech landscape demanded it, but this felt different. Personal. The kind of mystery that could unravel everything. He scanned the dining room again, searching for a clue. The note's handwriting was shaky, desperate, scrawled in blue ink. C. Who was C? And why had this plea landed under his plate? The Gilded Fork was a haven for New York's elite, its walls adorned with modern art, and its menu boasting dishes that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Ethan had chosen it for tonight's dinner to impress a potential investor, but now his focus was elsewhere. He excused himself from Mia, claiming a quick call, and slipped toward the restroom, the note burning a hole in his pocket. In the quiet of the marble-tiled restroom, he unfolded the paper again. The words stared back, raw and urgent. "Help me. I'm trapped." C. No phone number, no details, just a cry that felt like it was meant for him. Ethan's mind raced. He'd built his company, Nexus Innovations, on solving problems, coding, logistics, market gaps. But this was no algorithm. This was human. Back at the table, Mia raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay, boss?" "Fine," Ethan lied, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. He cut into his steak, the act mechanical, his thoughts elsewhere. The restaurant hummed with conversation, clinking glasses, and soft jazz. But Ethan's world had narrowed to the note. He needed to act, but how? Confront the waiter? Search the kitchen? Or was this a trap? Some twisted game targeting him as a high-profile gay CEO whose face had graced Forbes' 30 Under 30? He glanced at the waiter who'd served him. A young man, maybe 26, with tousled blonde hair and striking blue eyes that seemed to avoid Ethan's gaze. The waiter's name tag read Caleb. See. Ethan's heart skipped. Could Caleb be the one who'd written the note? His movements were stiff, his smile forced as he cleared a nearby table. Ethan watched him, searching for signs. Fear, guilt, something. Caleb disappeared through the kitchen doors, and Ethan made a decision. He couldn't ignore this, not when someone might be in danger. He stood, leaving his barely touched steak, and followed. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of clanging pans and shouted orders. Chefs moved with precision, flames licking up from stovetops. Caleb stood at a prep station, chopping vegetables with a focus that seemed almost desperate. Ethan lingered near the door, unnoticed, his CEO instincts kicking in. Observe, analyze, act. Caleb's hands trembled slightly, his eyes darting toward a back exit where a burly man in a black suit stood, arms crossed, watching. Ethan's gut twisted. Something was wrong here. He stepped forward, pretending to adjust his cufflinks, and caught Caleb's eye. "Hey," he said, his voice low, casual. "You dropped something earlier." He held up the note, just enough for Caleb to see. Caleb's face paled, his knife pausing mid-chop. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Ethan saw it. Fear, raw and unfiltered. Caleb shook his head, almost imperceptibly, and glanced at the man by the exit. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his voice cracked. Don't lie, Ethan whispered, stepping closer. I can help you. Caleb's breath hitched, and for a split second, hope flickered in his eyes. But then the man in the suit moved toward them, and Caleb's expression shut down. Please, he mouthed, barely audible. Not here. Ethan nodded, slipping the note back into his pocket. He returned to his table, heart pounding, mind racing with questions. Who was trapping Caleb? And why? Was it the restaurant's owner, a shady figure known for his ties to New York's underworld? Or something more personal? Ethan had faced discrimination, scrutiny, and threats as an openly gay man in a cutthroat industry, but this felt like a puzzle he was meant to solve. As the night wore on, Ethan played the part of the polished CEO, charming Mia and the investor with talk of Nexus' latest AI project. But his thoughts were on Caleb. He'd seen the way Caleb moved through the dining room, shoulders tense, eyes downcast. Ethan knew that kind of weight, the fear of being seen, of being judged. He'd carried it himself before coming out, before building a life where he could be unapologetically himself. When Caleb brought the dessert menu, their fingers brushed as he handed Ethan the leather-bound booklet. Another note, tucked inside, fell into Ethan's lap. Meet me at the back alley. Midnight, please. Ethan's breath caught. This was no coincidence. Caleb was reaching out, trusting him with something dangerous. He glanced at Caleb, who was already moving away, his expression unreadable. Ethan checked his watch, 11:15 p.m., 45 minutes, to decide whether to step into the unknown. He thought of his own journey, growing up in a small Ohio town, hiding who he was, fighting to be seen as more than a stereotype. He'd clawed his way to success, but it hadn't come without scars. If Caleb was trapped, Ethan couldn't walk away. Not when he knew what it felt like to need saving. The investor droned on about market trends, but Ethan's mind was in the alley, imagining what waited there. Danger? Truth? Or something that could change everything. The alley behind the Gilded Fork was a stark contrast to the restaurant's opulence. Dim streetlights cast long shadows over damp pavement, and the air smelled of grease and forgotten garbage. Ethan stood near a rusted dumpster, his breath visible in the chilly September night. At 28, he'd faced boardroom battles and hostile takeovers, but standing here, waiting for a stranger who'd slipped him a desperate note, felt like stepping into a world he didn't understand. Midnight came and went. Ethan checked his watch, 12:05. Had Caleb played him? Or worse, had something happened? Just as he turned to leave, footsteps echoed from the darkness. Caleb emerged, his blonde hair catching the faint light, his blue eyes wide with panic. He was still in his waiter's uniform, a thin jacket thrown over it, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "You came," Caleb whispered, his voice trembling. He glanced over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to follow. "I said I'd help," Ethan replied, keeping his tone steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "What's going on, Caleb? Who's trapping you?" Caleb hesitated, his gaze flickering to the ground. "It's complicated. I didn't mean to drag you into this." "Too late," Ethan said, stepping closer. "You wrote that note for a reason. Talk to me." Caleb's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he looked younger than 26, like a kid caught in something too big. "It's my brother Lucas," he said finally. "He's mixed up with some bad people. They own this place, or at least they run it. I'm here because of him." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean, because of him?" Caleb's voice dropped to a whisper. "Lucas owes them money. A lot. He was working here, skimming from their side business. When they found out, they didn't just want the money back. They wanted him to work it off. But Lucas ran, and now they're holding me here, saying I have to pay his debt." Ethan's mind raced. "Side business? What are we talking about? Drugs? Gambling?" Caleb shook his head. I don't know everything. I just know they move stuff through the restaurant. Packages, money, I don't ask. They watch me all the time. That guy in the suit? His name's Victor. He's their muscle. Ethan remembered the man by the kitchen exit, his cold stare. So you're a hostage? Pretty much, Caleb said, his voice breaking. I can't leave. They know where my mom lives, where Lucas is hiding. If I run, they'll hurt them. Ethan's chest tightened. He'd heard stories of New York's underbelly, but this was raw, real, standing in front of him in the form of a terrified young man. Why me? He asked. Why slip me the note? Caleb's eyes met his, raw and unguarded. I've seen you on the news. The gay CEO who built Nexus from nothing. You seemed like someone who wouldn't look away. Someone who'd get it. Ethan's breath caught. Caleb's words hit deeper than he expected, stirring memories of his own struggles. Coming out to his conservative family, facing whispers in boardrooms, proving he was more than his identity. I get it, he said softly. But we need a plan. You can't keep living like this. Caleb nodded, but fear lingered in his eyes. They'll kill me if they find out I talk to you. Then we'll be careful, Ethan said, his voice firm. But I'm not leaving you in this. A noise, a bottle skittering across the pavement, made them both freeze. Caleb grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him behind the dumpster. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. Ethan's heart pounded as he peered out, seeing Victor's silhouette under the streetlight. The man scanned the alley, his hand resting on something under his jacket. Caleb's grip tightened, his breath shallow. Ethan placed a hand over Caleb's, a silent promise. I'm here. They waited, motionless, until Victor turned and disappeared back into the restaurant. We can't stay here, Ethan whispered. Come with me. My place is safe. Caleb shook his head. They'll know if I don't show up for my shift tomorrow. I have to go back. Then I'll come back tomorrow, Ethan said. We'll figure this out. Caleb looked at him, his eyes searching. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Ethan hesitated, then spoke from a place he rarely let others see. Because no one should have to live in fear. Not for who they are or what they're caught up in. I've been there, Caleb. Not your exact story, but close enough. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Then Caleb nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow, same time. As Caleb slipped back into the restaurant, Ethan stood alone in the alley, the weight of the night settling over him. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that could save a life or cost him everything. The next day, Ethan's corner office at Nexus Innovations felt like a cage. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan's skyline. But his mind was back in that alley, replaying Caleb's trembling voice, his desperate eyes. Ethan had barely slept, the notes, help me. I'm trapped and meet me at midnight, burning in his memory. He pulled up everything he could find on the Gilded Fork. Public records showed it was owned by a shell company, its true operators obscured. Posts from disgruntled employees hinted at shady dealings. Late-night deliveries, locked rooms, staff turnover. Nothing concrete, but enough to confirm Caleb's story wasn't paranoia. By evening, Ethan was back at the restaurant, this time alone. He told Mia he was meeting a contact, dodging her questions. The Gilded Fork buzzed with its usual crowd, but Ethan's focus was on Caleb, who moved through the dining room with a forced smile. Their eyes met briefly, a spark of recognition, before Caleb looked away, serving another table. Ethan ordered a drink, his mind working through options. He could call the police, but what proof did he have? A couple of notes? Caleb's word? If Victor and his bosses were as connected as Caleb implied, tipping them off could put Caleb in more danger. No, Ethan needed evidence, something solid. When Caleb brought his drink, Another note was tucked under the glass. Kitchen storage. After closing, be careful. Ethan's pulse quickened. Caleb was risking everything to trust him. He nodded subtly, sipping his drink to keep up appearances. At 1 a.m., the restaurant emptied, and Ethan slipped into the shadows of the alley again. The back door was propped open with a brick, just as Caleb had promised. Inside, the kitchen was dark, the only sound the hum of a refrigerator. Ethan moved silently, guided by the faint glow of an exit sign, until he reached a locked door labeled storage. He tested the handle locked, but then he heard a soft click, and the door creaked open. Caleb stood there, his face pale, a key trembling in his hand. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, but there was relief in his eyes. "Neither should you," Ethan shot back, stepping inside. The storage room was cramped, lined with shelves of dry goods and a faint smell of bleach. Caleb closed the door behind them, his breathing uneven. "They keep stuff in here," Caleb said, pointing to a locked metal cabinet. "I've seen Victor and his guys go in and out. I don't know what's inside, but it's not food." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Can you get it open?" Caleb hesitated, then pulled a paperclip from his pocket, bending it into a makeshift pick. "Lucas taught me a few things," he muttered, working the lock. After a tense minute, it clicked open. Inside were stacks of cash, small bags of white powder, and a ledger filled with coded entries, names, dates, amounts. Ethan's stomach churned. This was bigger than he'd imagined. "We need to take this," he said, pulling out his phone to snap photos. Caleb grabbed his wrist. "If they find out, I'm dead." "Then we'll make sure they don't," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But we can't let this go on." As they closed the cabinet, footsteps echoed outside. Caleb froze, his eyes wide. "Victor," he whispered. Ethan pulled Caleb behind a stack of crates, their bodies pressed close in the cramped space. Victor's shadow loomed in the doorway, his flashlight beam sweeping the room. Ethan could feel Caleb's heartbeat, fast and erratic, against his chest. He squeezed Caleb's hand, a silent reassurance. Victor lingered, muttering something into a radio, then left. Caleb exhaled, his forehead resting against Ethan's shoulder. "I can't keep doing this," he whispered. "You won't have to," Ethan said, his voice fierce. "We're getting you out." Back in the alley, Caleb's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "You don't get it, Ethan. These people, they don't let go." Lucas tried, and now he's hiding in some motel in Jersey, scared for his life. "Then we'll find him," Ethan said. "We'll get you both out." Caleb looked at him, his blue eyes searching. "Why do you care so much?" Ethan hesitated, then spoke from the heart. "Because I know what it's like to feel trapped. Not by criminals, maybe, but by expectations, by fear. I got out. You deserve that chance too." For a moment, they stood close, the air between them charged. Caleb's hand brushed Ethan's, tentative, then lingered. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan's heart raced, but he pushed the feeling down. This wasn't the time. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll figure out the next step." As he walked away, the photos on his phone felt like a ticking bomb. He was in deep now, and there was no turning back. Ethan spent the next day digging deeper. He called in a favor from a private investigator, Lena, who'd helped Nexus Vet Partners in the past. She confirmed the Gilded Forks ties to a crime syndicate operating out of Brooklyn. Small-time but ruthless, with a history of money laundering through restaurants. The ledger photos were gold, Lena said, but dangerous. "You're playing with fire, Ethan," she warned. "These guys don't mess around." Ethan didn't care. Caleb's face, his fear, his hope, kept him up at night. He couldn't walk away, not when he was falling for someone who needed him. It wasn't just the notes or the danger. It was the way Caleb looked at him, like Ethan was his lifeline. That night, Ethan returned to the restaurant, but Caleb wasn't there. A different waiter served his table, and Ethan's stomach knotted. Had something happened? He lingered until closing, then slipped into the alley, hoping for a sign. Caleb appeared at 1:15 a.m., his face bruised, his lips split. "They know," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Victor saw us last night. He thinks I'm talking." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Did he do this to you?" Caleb nodded, wincing. "He warned me, said if I try anything, they'll find Lucas. And my mom." Ethan's fists clenched. "You're not going back in there." "I have to," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "They're watching my every move." "Then we get you out now," Ethan said. "I've got people who can help. A lawyer, a PI. We'll protect your family." Caleb's eyes filled with tears. "You don't know what you're promising." "I know exactly what I'm promising," Ethan said, stepping closer. "I'm not letting you go through this alone." For a moment, they stood inches apart, the air heavy with unspoken feelings. Then Caleb leaned in, his lips brushing Ethan's in a hesitant, desperate kiss. Ethan froze, then kissed him back, his hands cupping Caleb's face, careful of the bruises. It was raw, real, a moment stolen from the chaos. When they pulled apart, Caleb's eyes were wet. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "Yes, you do," Ethan said fiercely. "We're getting you out. Tonight." They hatched a plan. Ethan would drive Caleb to a safe house Lena had arranged in upstate New York. From there, they'd track down Lucas and get Caleb's mom to safety. But as they moved toward Ethan's car, headlights flared at the end of the alley. Victor stepped out, his gun glinting in the moonlight. "Going somewhere?" Victor growled, his eyes fixed on Caleb. Ethan stepped in front of Caleb, his heart pounding. "Let him go," he said, his voice steady. "You don't want this kind of trouble." Victor laughed, cold and hollow. "You think you're untouchable, Mr. CEO? You're out of your league." Caleb's hand gripped Ethan's arm. "Run," he whispered. But Ethan didn't move. He'd spent his life fighting against prejudice, against doubt, against himself. He wasn't backing down now. "You're not touching him," he said, his voice like steel. Victor raised the gun, but before he could act, sirens wailed in the distance. Lena's doing. She'd tipped off a contact in the NYPD. Victor cursed, lowering the weapon, and bolted back into the restaurant. Ethan grabbed Caleb's hand, pulling him toward the car. "Let's go. Now." They sped through the city, Caleb trembling in the passenger seat. Ethan's mind raced. Victor would come for them, and the syndicate wouldn't let this go. But as he glanced at Caleb, his bruised face softened by the streetlights, Ethan knew he'd made the right choice. The safe house was a modest cabin nestled in the Catskills, surrounded by pines and silence. Caleb sat on the couch, a blanket draped over his shoulders, his bruises stark under the soft lamplight. Ethan paced, phone in hand, coordinating with Lena and the lawyer. The ledger photos had been sent to the NYPD, and a raid on the Gilded Fork was imminent. Lucas had been found in a Jersey motel, and Caleb's mom was on her way to a secure location. But safety felt fragile. Caleb hadn't spoken much since they'd arrived, his eyes distant. Ethan sat beside him, the silence heavy. "You okay?" he asked softly. Caleb shook his head. "I dragged you into this. You could have been hurt, or worse." Ethan took his hand, their fingers intertwining. "I chose this, Caleb. I chose you." Caleb's eyes met his, raw and vulnerable. "I've never had anyone fight for me like this." Ethan's heart ached. "You deserve it. You deserve to be free." to be yourself without fear. Caleb leaned into him, his head resting on Ethan's shoulder. I don't even know who I am anymore, he whispered. I've been so scared, for so long. Then we'll figure it out together, Ethan said, his voice steady. No more hiding. Days turned into weeks. The raid shut down the Gilded Fork, and Victor and his bosses were arrested, the ledger tying them to a web of crimes. Caleb and Lucas were cleared, their mom safe. Ethan used his connections to get Caleb a job at Nexus, a fresh start. One evening, they stood on the cabin's porch, the sunset painting the sky in pinks and golds. Caleb, now 27, looked lighter, his smile genuine. Ethan, 29, felt a warmth he hadn't known he was missing. I used to think I'd never get out, Caleb said, his hand brushing Ethan's. Then you found that note. Ethan smiled, pulling him close. Best steak I never ate. They kissed, slow and sure, the world fading around them. It wasn't just love. It was a promise, a future built on courage and trust. Caleb had been trapped, but so had Ethan, in his own way, by the weight of his success, his image. Together, they'd broken free. The note had been a cry for help, but it had become something more. A spark that lit a path to freedom, for both of them. And as the stars emerged above the Catskills, Ethan knew they'd face whatever came next, side by side.